or if you think of something afterwards, please email us directly at itam@shi.com, and we'll be sure to get an answer right back to you. Finally, a recording of this webinar will be made available to you all, and I'll be emailing a link out to everyone afterwards. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Hello, everyone. So thank you for that introduction, Lauren. I appreciate it. Today, we're going to be talking about a product that SHI and our ITAM team has been using for our customers for a number of years now, called JDisc. Before I get started with that, I would like to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here talking, and who our ITAM team is at SHI. So I'm Josh Reynolds. I'm the Senior ITAM Solutions Consultant for the ITAM team. I've been with SHI for over 19 years and have been helping SHI customers with IT asset management related issues for that entire time. The ITAM team is around 80 plus people globally. Most of our folks are former auditors themselves or are kind of industry old timers like myself with 20 or 30 years in the business. So we do hundreds of IT asset management projects every year for customers of every size, shape, vertical, and we encounter the majority of the types of problems that people run into and have probably done so many, many times over. So that's why we're here talking about this particular solution today. One of the biggest challenges that most of our clients run into is how to get accurate data. And we feel we found something that really, really works well. And that's what we're here to talk to you about. And before I do that, I want to make a quick point. The ITAM team rarely makes direct product recommendations. That's just, we're a very independent, neutral type of group. So it is, it's significant that we are pointing out JDisc as a tool that we're specifically promoting, because that's not how we normally roll. However, when we partnered with JDisc some years ago now to use it for all of our asset management activities, we found it's been extremely reliable and helpful, and that's why we're here to talk to you about it today and explain to you how either through us or on your own you can use JDisc to make your IT asset management and other types of systems much more accurate. So when we're talking about data collection for IT asset management in particular, but for honestly a lot of other types of asset management programs and IT management programs in your environment, there's three questions we really want to ask ourselves. Of course, what are we trying to do? Right? If we're going to look out for data, what do we want it for? What are we trying to get out of this? We want to ask, what of the data that's out there do we need in order to accomplish this specific goal? And we want to know where we get that data. Now, this might seem very elementary, but these three questions are largely what ultimately drove us to find a solution that could handle the majority of the data sources in a single place. Before we did what a lot of you were doing, which is trying to merge data sources from multiple systems, which we'll talk about in a moment. And we found that become so cumbersome that we needed something better, and JDisc was what filled that gap. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We just talked about where to start. We're going to look a little bit at the types of data that we need for different types of activities. We're going to very quickly examine what I'm calling the old way, which is the more traditional multi-source way of doing asset discovery. We're going to talk about why JDisc is better and what it does, and then a very loose conversation about how do we integrate this data into our existing practices. So these are the types of typical things that most of our clients are trying to do. They're preparing for true ups and renewals. They may have an audit letter that they're trying to respond to, or they might be getting ready or trying to harden themselves against an audit. They may be looking to save money through examining compliance and optimizing the licensing that they have in their environment. They may have an interest in hardware asset management. There may be challenges around cloud compliance and what products am I putting in my cloud environment. And there might be some issues around subscription management, right? How do I understand the types of things that I need to do? So for each one of these activities, there's a different set of data points. Now, I'm going to go through these quite quickly because the slide deck will be available after this. And obviously we don't want to spend our time here reading slides out loud. I'm just going to flip through them quickly to give you an idea of the types of data points that are necessary and how they differ from each other. So true ups and renewals have a specific set of information that is necessary in order to be able to fully do that analysis properly. An audit has some that are the same, and there's some that are different. There is compliance and optimization, which is very similar to true up and renewal, but it has a little bit more of a strategic direction to it. and generally has a little bit more of an ongoing improvement point of view. Hardware asset management, more focused on physical location and status of devices and making sure devices are in use, and monitoring warranty and other types of long-term entitlement. Cloud compliance is a combination of things that you have in the cloud and things that you have on-prem and how those things interact with each other. And subscription management, right? Again, there's some things that have very similar attitudes about things that on other types of activities, and there's some that are quite different. And we need to be able to balance both of those types of data. So as we can see, there's a lot of different things out there, right? So with any one of those goals or a combination of those goals, the old school approach has generally been, let's take reports from everything we can humanly find and let's squeeze them together into what we call the big database, right? So if we're going to try to cover all 4 of these attributes, we're going to pull feeds from the CMDB and from systems management and probably from our reseller or maybe directly from our OEM providers. There's going to be feeds from change management and service management and facilities. And as you can see, it turns into sort of a spaghetti mess of lots and lots of different sources all trying to feed into the same function. And when we do things this way, one of the first challenges that we run into is that, one, all of these systems are designed for a specific purpose. The CMDB, for example, is designed for change management, right? And it's to manage configuration items, not necessarily assets, but configuration items. And though there is a passing similarity between a CI and an asset, they are not in fact the same thing. Systems management is about monitoring systems and keeping them up and running. So the types of data they collect and the way that they format that data isn't the same as you would expect for an asset. And this is true across all of these different sources. So if we were to momentarily, I want everyone to just sort of envision a spreadsheet, right? And think about what the column headers would be for each of these systems. Think about it, they're all going to have slightly different and sometimes very different column headers. And then if you think about the kind of information that it might tell you about that information is the names, the titles, the taxonomies of those things are going to be different. Change management might care, for example, about the name of a specific installation package, right? You might have 10 different versions of SQL Server depending on where it's being deployed. Change management might call it just SQL Server, not care about additions, because change management is handling how SQL Server is utilized and leveraged from both a business and an IT point of view. Service management might list the different options of of SQL Server, the tools, the other sort of add-on products that are part of the database but are not necessarily licensable. The reseller is going to give you the SKU that you buy, but the SKU might be for multiple copies of that particular product. It might be upgrades or software assurance or maintenance or other things that are not the exact title that you're looking for. So when we think about what a mess that this particular approach can be, we're trying to take multiple sources that honestly in many ways speak different languages, and we're trying to squeeze them together into something and hope at the end of that, we're going to find the information that we need to achieve our goals. The big database I generally refer to as what it really is a black hole. You put all sorts of things into it, but what really comes out of it is oftentimes not much of actual value because you're trying to construct something that is not purpose suited to the goals that you're trying to accomplish. And what happens when we do that? We have an incomplete puzzle. We're trying to put something together, but we don't have all the pieces. And again, I'm not going to read all this out loud to you, but if you have a look at the different types of data points that are often missing, that can create immense QC challenges for any asset management program, and frankly, for configuration management and service management as well. So the big database approach is something that we tried to do like most other companies did for quite a number of years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we said, okay, enough is enough. This is not working for us. It's a headache for our clients, and it's a headache for us as a service provider. So we started looking for something that we thought would be better. And that's how we came across JDisc. JDisc has quite a few things that it does better than any other tool that we've talked about. High level, categorically, it is a centralized tool. You can put it on a schedule and point it at something and let it continue to repeat that function and refresh data on a regular basis. It is zero footprint, so you do not need to write anything to any device. It's not pushing out memory or hard drive resident agents out to the devices. It's compatible with just about any operating system and system in use today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further on the presentation, but I've often been surprised at the sort of things that JDisc is capable of finding. It is current and accurate, meaning unlike some other systems that you have in your infrastructure that may have older data, maybe the database isn't purged as regularly as it could be, so you're trying to figure out from older records and current records what's actually the truth. JDisc doesn't worry about those sort of things because it's reaching out across the network, scanning and interrogating devices and pulling down what is the real truth today about my hardware, my software, and my configuration. It has a lot of capability around networking, both collecting information about networking devices, but also things like network topographical and dependency mapping, and we'll talk about that. And it has some very interesting security features if those are of interest to you as well. So that's a high level what we're going to do. We're going to bounce through each one of these topics as we go. And just a reminder for anyone who came in late, our Q&A is going through Slido, so you would want to go to the website that you see here. At the bottom left, you'll see a hashtag. You want to put the code JDisc in, and that'll bring you to our Q&A. And Lauren's going to collect the questions throughout the session, and then we'll go through Q&A here at the end. So remember our big mess, right? The big plate of spaghetti, the old school way. Let's rebuild that using JDisc and see how different that is. So we want to have our IT asset management database, right? But we see that now JDisc is fulfilling the majority of these attributes all by itself. Yes, there's still a little information that we might pull from service management, such as install, move out, change activities, some status information. Sometimes change management might have building numbers or floor numbers or things that are important. But for the most part, we've gotten rid of almost all the spaghetti because what took an additional 5 or 6 systems to try to get to, JDisc can do all by itself without any help. So some of you are probably wondering about what zero footprint means. So let's talk about that for a minute. Zero footprint means it is a network-based tool, and it does not rely on installing agents. Now, zero footprint has the ability to run local instructions. So let's talk about that because those of you on the phone that are network or security minded might be curious about that. There are some attributes and some pieces of information that you cannot always get remotely. So what JDisc will do is spool code out into the local memory, execute those commands, pull back that information into the tool. So it never writes anything to the hard drive and it doesn't leave anything behind, but it can actually spool instructions out to the local system just in the RAM to execute some things that need to be executed locally to pull the information back. An excellent example of that would be the registry. A lot of information for products is encoded in the registry and not in the WMI table, but almost nobody these days has remote reg enabled for obvious reasons. So rather than ask you to, rather than have the tool say, hey, can you enable remote registry so I can talk to the registry, it just spools some commands out into the local memory, executes them, and pulls the information back. So that's what we mean by zero footprint. Doesn't leave anything behind on the device, but it does have more authority than the typical scanning utility because it has that capability to do some things within the local memory that you wouldn't be able to do remotely because it would be blocked or not possible across the network. We talked about compatibility, and I have a few things about compatibility that we want to discuss, but everybody has a mixed environment. I don't think anybody on this phone could reasonably say that every single device in their environment runs the same operating system. These are just a few of the compatible operating systems that we see on a regular basis, but JDisc, for the most part, does not care what OS you're running. If it's out there, JDisc will find it and it will inventory it. So no matter how mixed your system is, no matter if you're emulating one operating system on another, whatever you have out there, be it brand new, spanking, awesome technology or really, really old mainframes that are still running off Telnet, chances are JDisc is going to be able to find that device. And it's also compatible with all the major hypervisors. Again, this is just 3 because I didn't want to clutter the screen up too much. But if you're running virtualizing systems, which I'm sure almost, if not 100% of you are, JDisc can find that information and it can enumerate it in ways that you probably don't have access to internally. So let's take a look at what we mean by virtualization and the ability to map it. If I am doing license compliance, or if I'm trying to defend myself in an audit, and I have licenses that are measured by processor or core, the publisher, for the most part, almost 100% of the time, say 99.5% of the time, does not care what I provisioned to the virtual machine, how many vCores I've assigned it. What the publisher cares about is the total number of physical cores or processors in the physical host of the virtual machine. Beyond that, most of them also care about the total number of cores in a cluster. So I might have a 4-core server, but if my 4-core server is in a cluster of total 4 machines, each with 4 cores, it's 16 cores that the publisher cares about. So it is critical in compliance, optimization, audit defense, and in measuring cost and being able to control cost to be able to trace the whole hierarchy of the virtualization system back to the source. So after running JDisc, we can look at our data centers, and let's say we pick out a data center. We can pull out all the clusters that live in that data center, and then pull out all the physical devices that reside within that cluster. And then pick one of those hosts, and let's see all of the virtual machines that live on that physical host at the time of last scan, and then ultimately what products are running on those virtual machines. If you put JDisc into a regular refresh cycle, as in letting it scan and rescan and update data on a regular basis, even if you have very flexible VM affinity rules that allow virtual machines to bounce around between clusters or machines, JDisc will continually tell you where that virtual machine is today. So as your environment is changing, JDisc can continually reach out, collect information, and update it so you know what the truth is. And that's going to happen faster than your change management system. It's going to happen faster than the CMDB. It's going to happen faster than ITSM, because those systems have some lag time between the request, the actual work is done, it's recorded, and it's published. So JDisc can actually do that much, much faster than any of the systems that you generally have on premise. Networking devices, let's talk about that for a minute. Now, obviously, if you're doing any sort of asset scanning, we want to get end user devices. Of course, that makes sense. Servers, desktops, laptops, etc. But there's a lot of other stuff out there. Peripherals and monitors, not as important to people these days as it was, 15 years ago. But, some people may still want to know what's out there. But here's the more important stuff: your switches, routers, load balancers, firewalls, security devices, network attached storage, printers, IP phones, IoT devices, and even telepresence systems like you have in conference rooms. Again, if it's network connected, generally JDisc is going to find it. And you would be surprised at the sort of things that we have found when we're helping customers and we're scanning with JDisc. We've seen, entire sets of wireless access points that network security and network operations had no idea existed. We've seen, large network attached storage arrays that no one knew existed, that were not monitored, that didn't have access controls, that were not encrypted according to company policy. So one of the benefits of something that can reach out and sweep the network in the way that JDisc does is that you'll often find things that you had no idea were out there. And from a security point of view and from a compliance point of view, the unknown unknowns are probably the scariest part of any environment, and the ability to scan across the network and go and find things really helps you identify what you know, what you know doesn't work right, and more importantly, find those unexploded landmines out there, things that you didn't even know were out there, to be worried about them. So current and accurate. This is an important point that I can't stress enough. And so I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about this, because as I mentioned before, JDisc is reaching out and it's talking to machines and it's finding out what's true right now, right? And what does the real truth mean? The real truth means that from a CMDB point of view, let's say we're comparing it to a system like SCCM. Let's say that a specific server has had 3 different SQL servers installed on it, say a 2014 standard and a 2016 and a 2018. The previous 2 have been uninstalled, and only the 2018, Enterprise R2 is still running. However, when you run the SCCM report, you're going to get all 3 of them. And you may even get some other components or other, DLLs or supports or redistributables or other sorts of things that may look like an SQL server but aren't. However, the other thing about SCCM is that it deals largely with the WMI table of Windows, which means it can't tell you if that SQL server is standard, developer, enterprise, data center, because that resides in the registry. So if I am the network administrator and I'm trying to provide data to my asset management team because they're under audit from Microsoft, when I run that SCCM report, I'm immediately confronted with a series of problems. I don't know what additions are there. I don't know which of the installations I see in my SCCM database are real and which are probably uninstalled. And many times, I may not even know from that SCCM report if the device or virtual machine I'm looking at is even still there, because oftentimes devices are repurposed and renamed. You'll get the same serial number, for example, with multiple network names because a laptop or a server has been re-imaged, redeployed, repurposed multiple times. So each entry I have has a different software stack on it. So I have to figure out from a quality control point of view, before I can even give anything to my asset management team or to my audit defense team, which of my SCCM devices are real, which ones are currently active, because SCCM may not know if this device is in use or not. So I might have devices that I'm reading in SCCM that are actually in storage closets or are in break fix or are no longer in use. And then when I finally figure out, is this asset relevant or not, and what the current one is, I'm still confronted with figuring out what is actually installed on it versus what the SCCM records tell me. And that is not a weakness of SCCM as a tool. That is what it's supposed to do, because it's supposed to manage software packaging and deployment and to act as a configuration management database. From those sorts of networking and IT activities, you want to know what the history is, because that's relevant to you from a security and a change management point of view. From an asset management point of view, we care what's going on right now. We don't care what happened 2 years ago. We care about what's the truth right now, because that truth right now is what we're presenting. For example, in this example for an audit defense, we want to say what's true right now, so it's because we don't want to pay for what appears to be over deployment when in fact these are phantom devices that no longer exist. So that's what I mean about the real truth. It's not a dig or a criticism of how existing systems are being managed, because they're being managed the way they're supposed to be. It is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's when you try to shoehorn a system into a purpose for which it was not designed that you end up having problems. Another thing I want to talk about current and accurate is there's no formatting issues. And what I mean by that is, if you think back to earlier on in the presentation, we talk about a spreadsheet. All the different reports that you run are all structured differently. The names of things are different. The headers are different. Then if I'm trying to build an asset record, I've got to figure out, okay, of the 6 different ways Oracle database is being referenced in all of my reports, which one am I going to call Oracle database? Is it Oracle underscore database? Is it Oracle dash database? Then the build number, what am I going to settle upon as the actual name for something? And when I do that for inventory, then I also, of course, have to be able to relate that to the licensing that I purchase as well. So when you scan everything from the same tool, it agrees with itself, of course. It's logically consistent about what it calls things and how the data is structured. So as opposed to spending more time fussing about in Excel spreadsheets, trying to squeeze data from disparate systems together into something that actually is uniform, you skip that entire step when you use something like JDisc, because it's its own authority and it's pulling its own data in its own format. And JDisc was designed expressly to do discovery. It is not a configuration management tool. Now, a lot of our clients actually use it to improve configuration management data because some of the discovery sources they have for their CMDBs aren't as great as they could be. And that is probably its second most popular purpose after asset management. But the folks that designed JDisc did it expressly to answer a very specific and very important question, which is, what do I have and what's real out there? So it's not trying to do networking management. It's not trying to do security management. It's not trying to do patch management or certificate management. It's not trying to do any of those functions. It's trying to discover what the truth is about each device, the configuration of the device, the network hierarchy, et cetera. that you use for whatever purpose. And in our case, we use it for IT asset management. Warranty. Now, I bet you there's plenty of people on the phone right now who find managing the warranty and support for hardware devices to be a massive pain in the neck. Now, I'm old, so I've been around long enough that I remember we used to get huge boxes full of paper envelopes with care packs in them, and we had to take each one out and write the serial number down in the field and write the OEM keys and other things on it, and then we had to put a sticker on it, and I'm sorry, we had to put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it and actually mail it back to the manufacturer. That's how you registered back in the day. It's not as bad these days, but it is pretty cumbersome for most folks. JDisc has a lot of automated tie-ins for most of the major hardware manufacturers. So if you enable the feature, as it's scanning along, telling you all the cool stuff that's in your environment, it can also reach out to all these manufacturers and pull down your warranty, extended support, phone support, depot support, any hardware entitlement that goes along with those devices. It can pull out and collate it for you in a single place. So you can start to look at not only how many things do I have expiring, but how many do I have on a quarter by quarter basis. And that's pretty helpful because the amount of preparation it takes to prepare to refresh 25 devices is very different than it is for 250, which is very different than 2,500. And when you want to get started in that refresh planning process, has a lot to do with how big that particular task is. So JDisc, when it comes to warranty information, takes something that used to be massively tedious and time consuming and manual, and generally can collect that information over the course of a couple of days. So you have it all day. And as you can see here from this screenshot this is from our delivery system, our ITAM Data Insights portal that we use for our customer deliveries. You can see all the different types of support that are being pulled. So it's not just your warranties. You got limited technical support and phone support and hard drive management, backup support, and so on and so forth. So lots of different things here that it can pull all by itself without any effort aside from you enabling it to do that, which helps your hardware asset management functions a ton. And it also really helps your security functions too, because a lot of folks would like to know if you have devices out there that are performing critical tasks that no longer have any support, i.e. if it breaks, something critical might fail because of that. Let's talk a bit about networking. Obviously, that's another point that's really important. It is difficult to get a good network map. Yes, there are tools that do that. I'm not saying that JDisc is the only one, but getting a holistic, complete network map is kind of a pain in the neck. And JDisc does this as an innate function. And this function is important for a number of reasons. It's not just important from a dependency point of view, knowing which parts of the networking environment are critical to running other parts. There's also a lot of interesting things that you can do from a compliance and optimization point of view if you think about understanding your network connection. If I can see, for example, that I have a specific database that has 700 devices that hit it daily, and I have another SQL or a database server that has 3 devices hitting it, that might make a big influence on how I elect to do a license model for those. So, you know, if I have a heck of a lot of clients accessing a database, I might go for a data center type license, something that has an unlimited number of connections, so that I don't have to hassle with just how many people are there, and I don't have to buy a lot of CALs in order to enable that access, just using Microsoft as an example. If I have a database that has very few connections, maybe it supports another product, I might go use some of my older device CAL models for that, because none of those types of licenses permanently live on any device. You can, quote unquote, allocate them anywhere you like. So let's take a look at what's the most efficient way to do that. And knowing how many devices are hitting a specific database is a very powerful tool to determining which of the licenses that you own you might want to allocate to it. So security. JDisc has quite a bit to contribute to security in understanding different types of shares that are out there and the permissions to those shares. That's a function that you can turn on. We have found that a lot of our clients have found some very interesting things about, for example, people changing roles within the company and not having previous shares and permissions removed. So let's say that you move from HR into marketing. When you were in HR, you had access to some pretty sensitive stuff. And it is very easy, no matter how well developed the change management program is, for one of those steps to be missed. And JDisc can go and show on a user by user basis what that device has access to and what level of permissions go along with that. And that can be very, very helpful in making sure that we didn't accidentally leave some things turned on. As you might imagine, most of you on the phone, that asset management is very, very important to some of the most heavily regulated industries, your healthcare, HIPAA regulated industries, Department of Defense, intelligence, things along those lines. And these features come in very, very handy in understanding who has access to what and ensuring that when a process fails, that there's something looking across the network that's going to notice that failure, bring it to someone's attention so that they can then go and remediate it. And of course, patches, certificates, and other types of security-related items are inventoried across the entire environment. And this can provide, again, better visibility even than your memory resident configuration management agents, because a lot of those, there's products out there these days that do not necessarily leave a clear, clean record in the WMI table in a Windows device, for example. And knowing what patches are out there and what security levels are present on a given device and being able to compare that to what they're supposed to be and notice deviation, again, a very powerful tool. Now, if we think about these sort of security features, we would probably think usually of an endpoint security product or an antivirus / endpoint security product as being the source of information for a lot of this. And they vary depending on what version of it is and what features are selected and how often they check in. Whereas JDisc can handle a lot of that function all by itself. And also, it's a great way to compare to what you're getting from your end user management products to see if they're aligned and they're coming back right. The third most popular function for JDisc that most of our clients use is to use it to validate the results from other systems. So sometimes you'll notice that an agent was deployed to a system and that became an image, and then that image was rolled out multiple times, and that there was some configuration problem with that agent and it's not replying back in the way it's supposed to. JDisc is a great way to examine, again, going back to that concept of truth, the truth about the environment and giving you a good source of record to compare other systems to, not just IT asset management systems, but systems across the board. So let's talk a little bit about integrating, right? We have different systems. What are we going to put in to this environment? How are we going to make that play nice? So let's take JDisc. It's scanning lots of things. There's other data systems that you have in your environment as well. We expect that. And if I'm doing asset management, for example, I want some information from my CMDB. A good piece of information from a CMDB is about what's permitted. JDisc will tell you what's there, but not necessarily if it's allowed to be there. This configuration management database should know what's supposed to be there and what's not supposed to be there. So JDisc says this product is here, CMDB says this product is authorized. If it's not authorized, asset management should flag that and say, there's a problem here. We have an unauthorized product on this device. HR data generally is about supporting things like subscription management and, think about O365. If you're pulling information from HR about who is actively working and who's not, that should inform your asset management system about who should have a subscription and who shouldn't. And there's probably some information about metadata. JDisc can't scan a device necessarily and say, I'm in the third rack in the second row of the data center, because that's not something that you program into the device itself. So some of that metadata, floors, locations, business units, chargeback codes, ownership, custodial ownership, things like that. Those are things that you would feed into your asset management system. But if you notice in this setup, there's a lot fewer sources than you would normally expect in a well-functioning asset management program, because JDisc can handle the functions of half dozen to a dozen other sources that would normally be involved. And then, of course, once you've done all that, you can have your nice reporting that combines all this results down into something that you can actually make business and technical decisions on and know that it's truth. Notice that JDisc here maybe is both feeding the asset management database and improving the results of the configuration management database so that when they come together, they're coming together in a uniform way. So we are at about a few minutes left here for Q&A. So for those of you that have questions, please get started here as I'm going through the next steps, and then we're going to leave you a nice, 10+ minute period for question and answer. What are the next steps from our point of view here today based on what we talked about? Start with your 3 big questions, of course, right? Define the inventory goals that you have, because that will allow you to look at a tool like JDisc and understand, is it going to do the things that I want it to do? So when I know my goals, I know what I need to fulfill my goals, and then I can pair that to the discovery tool to see if the discovery tool can fulfill those data points, which then fulfill my goals. And make a plan, right? If you want to work with JDisc and you want help with it, please contact your AE. If you're an SHI customer, we are happy to, they'll bring it to us. We can get you set up. We can provide a lot of support, documentation, and guidance around JDisc. You can schedule a demo with us if you want someone to walk you through how it works and show you very specifically from real world data what data is collecting. You can also talk to us about different customers, different types of security requirements and restrictions, and how that has worked for other clients. And you can also want to plan to compare what JDisc can do to your existing data. And that should give you a pretty good feel for if it's worth pursuing it. And ask for help. We're here if you need us. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, we have an extremely large team. We work with hundreds of customers every year. We've been there, done that, and gotten multiple t-shirts. If you have a question, we don't care how small it is. We're here to help all of SHI's client base. So if you need something, reach out to us, reach out to your AE, and just know that we're here for you. We have a big team expressly so that we have the resources and the wherewithal and the knowledge to be there for you when you need us. And now I think we'll open it up to Q&A. And Lauren has been collecting questions throughout the session on Slido. So if you want to flip over there, we can start fielding some questions.
Okay, thanks, Josh. So we do have 4 or 5 questions. So the first one is, if JDisc only scans on devices on the network, how does it handle devices that are not or were never on the network?
It's an excellent question, and I would be actually surprised if no one did ask that. So you're right, the JDisc is network dependent. Now, when you first set JDisc up, you're going to tell it where to look for things, right? And there's different ways depending on how you're architected. You can, of course, tell it to say, look at my Active Directory. You can give it network ranges. You can give it OUs with NAD to look at. You can tell it to literally crawl, IP address by IP address across the network. There's a lot of different setups, but JDisc will go and look for things that it expects to be there. And if it's not there, let's say that let's use the most common scenario, which is you've given it access to Active Directory. It knows what Active Directory devices are active. It's going to scan across laptops in the office, for example. It's going to see some that are not currently on the network. It's going to waitlist them, put them in the back of the queue, continue on scanning away, and it'll try those devices that were offline on different intervals, which is also configurable, until it finally gets it. Now, if you have a device that has never been on the network and never will be on the network, obviously that's something that a network scanning utility cannot communicate with. The way that we handle that in our asset management programs is via a variety of techniques, depending on what makes the most sense. If that device does have an agent on it that is reporting something back, we might pull that information. We might give it an agent. We have an HTTPS-based memory agent if you actually want to put something that's installed on the device on it. Other types of reporting, there's quite a few techniques for that. But for clarity, if it's on the network now, but it will be, JDisc will wait and it'll check in every once in a while until it finds it. If it's never going to be on the network, of course, JDisc is not going to be able to interrogate the device because it's just not present. I hope that answers the question. And again, if you are writing questions, if I didn't clarify that enough, feel free to go into the Slido thing and just reiterate the question or ask for clarification. It'll show up at the bottom and we'll get back to it. So how long does JDisc take to scan a typical environment? Say about 14,000 devices. Well, it takes approximately 60 seconds per device on average to interrogate a given device. Some things that don't have operating systems, like a switch, right, which is sort of a dumb device, so to speak, a zero terminal, something like that, will probably take a little bit less time. And of course, JDisc is not going to be goofy and try to scan 14,000 devices simultaneously. It will break up the inventory into a set of devices, work through those, move on to the next one. That is also configurable. So I would say if you had 14,000 devices, probably if you let it scan for a day, it probably could get through it in 24 hours or less. Again, that depends on how you configure the scan and how many devices you want to talk to simultaneously, and if there's any restrictions on time of day, like some of our customers will, don't want people scanned during the workday, things like that. So that may vary based on your setup, but in general, you're looking at a minute or less per device. And thank you, Van. That was good feedback. Lauren, could you read that out, because it just disappeared from the screen? Van just gave a point there. I think it was on the chat for.
Oh. I don't see it.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that then. Does JDisc have a large bandwidth footprint? No, actually. It's one of the reasons that we use it. It does not have a large bandwidth footprint. 200, 300K of data per device on average is being transmitted. We run this in environments of 500 seats up to 250, 300,000 seats. We've never had anyone say anything about network load, though it does an extremely thorough job of inventorying devices. The data it's transmitting is essentially CSV type data. It's very, very small. So you do not have to worry about it clogging up your network. You don't have to worry about it burning too many CPU cycles on your end user devices. It's not going to consume so much memory that it slows down the performance of critical systems. We have yet to have anyone say they even noticed it was running when it comes to bandwidth or systems resource consumption. What kind of firewall ports and permissions? That is an excellent question, and it's a bigger question than I can reasonably answer right here, because it really depends on, of the many, many features that it has, which ones you intend to use and what kind of data you're looking to get. In the high level sense, it is going to communicate over pretty typical ports, and most of the stuff does not require administrator privileges. Now, that's not true for everything, but it is true for the most part. Read-only permission is the standard. There are some activities that might require elevated permissions depending on what you're trying to get and how you're trying to get it. But we do have full breakdowns in documentation of all of that, as does JDisc themselves. But if you want, just reach out to your AE and we can send you over a full list of all the different permissions for different types of systems, the types of scenarios that those serve. You don't have to turn everything on in JDisc, for example. So it does depend. Generally, minimal access. There are a few elevated scenarios based on what you're trying to do. With COVID staff, my staff work at home. How does it deal with VPN? If it's connected to the network and the customer is on, the end user is on VPN, it should be able to interrogate that device without any issues. We have occasionally run into situations where specific types of traffic are blocked over VPN. So in a test scenario, if you're running a test and you weren't getting back the sort of things that you were expecting, the first thing I would look at is is your VPN system itself or any of your security layers blocking certain types of traffic. For customers that have work from home staff, even before COVID, when we were asked to inventory them for asset management projects, we'll sometimes create an exception, or you might even create a service account that's only active during certain times of day. So there's definitely lots of different methods to solve that. But to answer the high level question, if you're on VPN and you're connected to your network the way you would normally be if you were physically in the office, JDisc can collect information from you just as though you were working in your own cubicle or your own office. What information is captured for network equipment like Cisco, et cetera? Goodness, a tremendous amount of hardware information in particular is captured. If you wanted to know what, the north and south bridges of the, residing across your CPU, what the makes and models and revision numbers are, that's the sort of stuff that JDisc can capture. It can do a limited amount of perf monitoring, performance monitoring type information. That's largely for disk space, CPU cycles, and memory usage. So for networking gear, if you turn on all the features, it can generally tell you what connects to what type of traffic is going in which direction, what ports are open and closed. It's very, very detailed. And if you'd like more detail than I can really provide without boring the heck out of most people on the phone here, just email us after this and I'll shoot you over a list of all the stuff it does. Could JDisc get data from my AWS service? That's an excellent, excellent, excellent question. So let's talk about cloud infrastructure as a service. A cloud device, a wise man once said, is just a computer. It's just a computer in somebody else's house. That's the simple explanation. But when it comes to AWS, Azure, etc., the hardware is the question. If you want to scan for operating system and for installed software and things like that, JDisc should be able to get that just fine. One of the challenges you run into is what hardware am I running? And that's going to come back to what your infrastructure as a service provider is willing to let you scan and what they're willing to report back to you. If you have dedicated hardware, as in a serial number level dedication, that's generally possible. If you are granted in your contract a minimum amount of functionality, but they can move you to any hardware in their environment they see fit at any time, they're generally not going to allow you to scan all the way into the processor and the core. So those are situations that, again, we've got lots of experts that do this every day. If you have a scenario like that, we can talk you through in a more detailed way what the options are and what the approaches are. And it looks like we have one more left, and which means we're keeping up pretty much on time, I think, here. How does JDisc determine what to scan? AP, AD, subnets, IP range, all of the above, and then some. We even have some clients that have imported CSV lists of machine names. So it really depends on how you want JDisc to scan and what you want it to look for. Another area about that that's important is that you may have different pieces of your environment that you want to use different techniques on. So a test and development environment might have one methodology, whereas your general, working at their desks folks have one version, and you might have secure systems that have another type of interrogation technique. You can mix and match approaches based on your network architecture and the things that you're trying to do. So all of those are definitely ways we can do it, and even beyond that, and you can use different systems for different parts of your environment. So it looks like we might be out of questions. Anybody else have anything else? I'll wait a few more moments here, and then I think that if there are no more questions about it. Oh, does this integrate with ServiceNow? That's a good question. Does anything integrate with ServiceNow? Yes, if you do it. We have a lot of folks that want to use and do use JDisc data to update ServiceNow. So there's many methods to put data into ServiceNow. The first thing that we would do in any ServiceNow integration is talk with your ServiceNow team to understand how your database is set up, the types of activities and functions that you're using ServiceNow for, any naming standards or naming conventions that you have in place, so that when we're looking at how would you build that integration, we want to make sure that the data is aligned properly. You're not overwriting fields with data that's incompatible with things that you're already doing. But as far as how does it integrate, we can do it through a variety of techniques, from dropping a CSV file down that you import into ServiceNow on a regular basis, to database connections via scripting automation, to lots of other techniques. So that really depends on what you're doing with it and what you want to import, but definitely integratable into ServiceNow and any other similar system. Just needs some work in the back end to make sure that we're doing it right.
Looks like that's all the questions that we have. Thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone for your time today. Just a reminder, if we didn't get to your question or if you think of one afterwards, please email us directly at itam@shi.com. Just another reminder, I will send out a recording of the webinar to everybody afterwards. And we hope you guys can join us. We have 2 more webinars in our series. The next one is on May 4th We'll be reviewing the preliminary findings of a survey we have running with the ITAM review, so Secrets to ITAM Technology Success on May 4th, and then on May 19th, we are going to have a session on making the most of Office 365. So we hope you guys can join us, and we hope that everyone found this helpful and informative, and I think we'll end it at that.
Thank you so much, everybody. Again, we're always here to help you. So if you have any follow-up questions, contact your AE or contact the ITAM team at SHI directly. And we're always here to help you with anything that you need. So thank you so much for listening. And everybody have a great day. Stay safe. And hopefully we'll all be back to normal sometime in the not terribly distant future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.